We are now less than 1 month away from the showdown in Singapore. The U.S. and North Korean leaders face to face for the first time in recent years. How will they say, "This is what I need, this is what you must do"? Will they talk to each other in polite terms or bellicosity? We'll see. Any agreements on the horizon? And for President Trump, what does he need to keep in mind as he prepares for this summit? Just a moment away, you're going to hear my interview with someone who has sat directly across the table from North Korea in the past. He knows the players, he knows the game. Former New Mexico governor, former UN ambassador, former Secretary of Energy, and House member Bill Richardson. He has done it all. But first, let's remember exactly where we are this Monday night in terms of talks between North Korea and the United States. So over the weekend, Pyongyang said it would hold a ceremony next week for disarming its nuclear test site. A lot of people saying this is just for show, but it's a show of good faith. And the Trump administration is now floating an idea, possibly allowing American companies to do business directly with North Korea as a reward to Kim Jongun. The U.S. Secretary of State has already met twice with Mr. Kim. Mike Pompeo has described those talks increasingly, and they've elongated over time, as warm. Here's what he said to CBS about it yesterday.
He is very knowledgeable in the sense of he knows the files. He's very capable of engaging in complex set of discussions. When I ask him a question about something that's a little off, he answers it. There's no note cards. It is Chairman Kim, in this case, interacting with me directly, having a robust discussion about what the outlines of a successful negotiation between our two countries might ultimately be.
Secretary Pompeo said American businesses could actually help build up North Korea's energy grid. That sentiment was echoed then by National Security Advisor John Bolton.
I think what the prospect of for North Korea is to become a normal nation, to behave and interact with the rest of the world the way South Korea does. And if you've ever looked at a map of the Korean Peninsula at night or a picture of the North Korean Peninsula at night, the contrast between North and South Korea is the most stark of any.
Lights, darkness.
Exactly. You can't tell North Korea from the Yellow Sea or the Sea of Japan on either side of it. So the prospect for North Korea is unbelievably strong if they'll commit to denuclearization.
So what will it take to get there? And is denuclearization enough? Should they go further? Can they? Or will North Korea's neighbors, some of them key U.S. allies, demand more? I talked about all that and more with former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, who's negotiated around the world for decades, including with Pyongyang. It resulted in the release of American prisoners. Governor Richardson, you have negotiated directly with North Koreans on the ground in the past, one of few Americans who have done that. What do you think President Trump needs to know when he gets there at the table?
Well, two things. One, the North Koreans make deals informally. They're not going to do it across the table. So my first bit of advice, which he never takes, is that he should take Kim Jong-un aside informally, walk with him at a meal, and try to negotiate the main components of a potential agreement that way. Formally, across the table with all their staffs, that's not how the North Koreans negotiate, and that's not how you produce results.
I see. So you almost want to have an informal agreement, or at least an infrastructure that when you're sitting down at the table, you can point to and say, let's work along these lines.
Yes, I think that's very important. I think Secretary Pompeo has done a good job of finding out something about Kim Jong-un, what makes him tick. It's obvious Kim Jong-un is concerned about his own security. He wants economic infrastructure, energy assistance, not aid. That he may be ready to trade nuclear weapons for economic issues. That's valuable. I think maybe President Trump's private sector experience can be helpful. But I just urge the president to be careful about not setting unrealistic expectations like the North Koreans should denuclearize immediately with complete verification. That's not going to happen. It should be try to get a process going of negotiation that leads to curbing of North Korea's weapons use.
So this might be an opening bid, in your view, rather than the end of everything to where you sign it, wrap it, it's done.
That's right. I think it can't be viewed as a one-shot deal, as one big photo op. the North Koreans have enormous patience. They're going to look for a long-term deal. I think we have to set timetables on the North Koreans, and most importantly, we have to set up strong verification inspections of what they commit to do, because they, in the past, have not fulfilled what they're going to do, especially on nuclear issues. And then I think you also need timetables, because the North Koreans like to slip deadlines, and this is very common negotiating strategy of theirs.
Many of these talks, especially that are this consequential, no one really ever gets to see. You're one of the people who has actually been in the room for some of these situations. Interpersonally, what would you advise against going into something like this that is so high stakes? Would it be to go too strong? Is it unadvisable to show any weakness?
Well, either side has to be careful about not setting unrealistic expectations. But I can say to the American delegation, the North Koreans are going to vent. They're going to talk about how they've been exploited, how the sanctions have hurt them. We have to listen to them. Let them proceed with their venting. And then the United States also has a right to express what our objectives, what our concerns are. But then I think in the informal sessions, president to president, secretary of state to secretary of state, hopefully an agreement can be reached.
Yeah, I saw that you were saying right now there is no real team doing this, that we have Secretary Pompeo, we might have a few more staff members, but then it's just kind of the president saying, I'm the guy, I'm it. And you want to make sure that you're fully prepared going into something like this. Let me ask you, Governor, I want to go through a few bullet points here just to get your take. When you talk about denuclearization, in your estimation, Kim Jong-un, what does that mean to him? What's he actually realistically willing to give up?
Well, what he means by denuclearization is a freeze on his nuclear and his missile activity, curbing their use, embargoes on exports of nuclear fuel. For him, it's not destruction of the nuclear weapons, which is what we want to see. I think what's most important here, as I said before, Kim Jong-un and the North Koreans, they don't like international inspections. They didn't allow him in previous agreements that they broke with the Bush and Clinton administrations. So we have to define exactly what denuclearization is, what timetables need to exist for any agreement, and then what scope of inspections. It has to be unfettered access. It can't be programmed inspections on certain areas, but not in other areas. There have to be very, very strongly committed to and worded.
I just wonder if the president says, listen, I know where you're at, Mr. Kim, but you know where I'm at. And the bottom line is it has to be complete disarmament. Do you think that that could ever be reached in these talks, whether it's next month or next year?
Well, we don't know for sure. I doubt it very much. I think certainly not next year. I think one of the timetables that I've seen from the administration is 2020. I think that's a little early, but I think it's worth pursuing a process that maybe goes beyond 2020, that deters and destroys and limits the use of North Korean missile and nuclear weapons. They've got maybe 60 nuclear weapons, 20 to 60. They've got missiles short range that threaten Japan and South Korea. They've got missiles that might reach the United States with a nuclear warhead in a few years. So, there's a lot of good things we can curb their use, but full denuclearization right away or very soon, let's be realistic. But maybe that's a negotiating position that the administration is taking, and that's okay.
What can President Trump compromise on?
Well, he has to compromise, I believe, if he wants this summit to be a success, on the definition on full denuclearization. Maybe he compromises on the timetable, he can't compromise on full inspections, on the specifics. You don't enter a negotiation saying it's either or I'm walking out. I don't think the president is doing that, but he does come close sometimes. I just think Pompeo, has the right framework. I read where he said, you know, North Koreans want infrastructure aid. They want energy grid assistance. They want to upgrade their economy with entrepreneurship. But they're going to have to give up their nuclear weapons. I think that's the procedure that we should look at, not, okay, full denuclearization like tomorrow, and then maybe we look at benefiting you. That's not going to work. The North Koreans have a lot of cards on their table.
So when do you know diplomatically, because I was reading you speaking to CBS a few years ago, NPR recently, and this is a consistent theme throughout your career, saying diplomacy is always the #1 option. When do you know, as the president said, it is time to get up and walk away from the table, if ever? When do you say, we tried, we couldn't do it?
Well, when sanctions don't work, when there's total miscommunication about what the objectives are, when there's hostility, when the other side breaks their word. But I think you have to go into a negotiation recognizing that the military option is the worst. With North Korea, a preemptive military strike, it made no sense. There is not a viable military option because of the potential death of 25 million South Koreans, our ally Japan. We have a nuclear umbrella. We have 25,000 troops in South Korea. We have 50,000 in Japan. So the national security situation almost eliminates a military option because of the enormous risks. And this is military people telling you this. So then diplomacy has to be the best option, but diplomacy can be not just talking. People think diplomacy is sitting across a table, you know, having a cocktail. Okay, let's make a deal. Diplomacy is sanctions, it's pressure, it's international pressure, it's building coalitions that harm the other side. Diplomacy is not just lovey-dovey stuff.
We know China really would like to see U.S. troops off of the Korean Peninsula completely. Do you think the president could ever say, yes, we'll take U.S. troops out of South Korea?
No, but I think he could do a reduction. China has geopolitical interests that want that, but we shouldn't accommodate China. But China has helped us on the sanctions with North Korea.
Let's say talks break down, and everyone wants them to succeed, including, it seems, China. But let's say they break down. Do you think China would be willing to continue enforcement, for the most part, of the sanctions that they've agreed to in the past on North Korea?
No, I think they'll stand by North Korea. I think it's evident that the talks that Kim Jongun has had with the Chinese, he's basically saying, look, I'm going to try to negotiate with President Trump. You got to ease up on the sanctions. And I think China has said, all right, but make a deal with Trump. So I think that's the variation right now.
Governor Bill Richardson, decades working on this issue, have spent time in North Korea. Thank you for bringing your time and expertise to this. So you can hear right there from the former ambassador, he is not completely down on these negotiations. In fact, he thinks diplomacy is the best thing to do, and it could be working toward the right direction. But verification will be the word of the day. As they always say in this, trust but verify. Verification. As of right now, we have to figure out how many nuclear weapons they have and where they are in the country.